we're going to continue with the second session, which is called Research on Looted Art and the Future Agenda. And I'm very happy to have with us Emmanuelle Polak from the Project Manager Provenance Research at the Louvre. And she can tell us more about the good things that are happening, but also the problematic things, specifically for France. And her title of her talk is Tracing Looted Artworks Within the Louvre Collection. Thank you, Emmanuelle.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Emmanuelle Polak, and I'm very, very pleased to be here today at the invitation of the Mauritshuis house in Den Haag. And before I begin, I would like to thank very much Martin Goslings, director, and Sheila Reda, the curator, for inviting me to make this very short presentation, I promise. And I would like to thank Judith Nissen for her passion first. Since 2020, I've been in charge in provenance research at the Musée du Louvre in Paris. When I was invited to speak at this conference, I was thrilled to share the news of the new French law passed on July 22, 2023. This law concerns the restitution of cultural goods spoliated during the systematic persecution of Jews between 1933 and 1945. Here we can see the French Minister of Culture, Madame Rima Abdul Malak, presented this legislation to the Senate in May 2023. I was very proud to say that this law was passed unanimously in both chambers of the French Parliament. This historic law, after the liberation, will make it easier to restore works currently held in public collection to their owners, in defiance of the principle of their supposed inalienability. It's even difficult in French, inalienabilité. And I thank Eline for her helping me with this principle. It's a public collection, so you can't sell it and you can't give it back to their owners, legitimate owners, because of this principle, a French principle. That's the reason why this law is an historic law. Unfortunately, I am quite pessimistic, worried even about the possibility of doing the work required to answer those questions regarding the darkest hour of French history in peace. I was educated as an historian specialism in the Second World War, and I never imagined that in my country, at this time, we could see the image will follow. These wild insults take us back to the chapter of French history that has not too long been relegated to the back of our memory. We have a duty to educate, and where we research the provenance, comprehend, and reconstruct the history of the Holocaust, we passed that history on. The topic of spoliation of Jewish property and its restitution is an extremely sensitive one that depends more than anything on political willpower. In today's presentation, I will very briefly revisit the historical background of the period in question before showing with great pleasure a number of rarely seen images from the Louvre during World War II. And lastly, I will discuss the spoliation of private collection and the need for the provenance research. Very, very fast, the Führer, as you know well, as in this megalomania, decided to designate Linz, the capital of Upper Austria, the artistic center for Europe, dominated by the artistic principle extolled by National Socialism. Hitler would personally oversee the execution of his dream, and he began drawing up plans that, to that effect, putting some of his most insane ideas down in paper. In this picture, taken February 1945, Hitler stares at the model of his art museum in Linz. You know also, the UK declared war on Germany on 11 a.m. on September 3rd, 1939. France follows suit at 5 p.m. And on May 10th, Hitler invaded Belgium, France, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The French army was routed and the Germans entered Paris on June 14, 1940. Their occupation would last more than 4 years. With the sound of German boots ringing out everywhere in the streets, the Wehrmacht sought to make it clear that the city was there. German troops proudly hung the Nazi flag on the Rue de Rivoli. During this time, Jacques Jaujard, director of the French Musées Nationaux, played a decisive role in protecting the collection of France's Public Museum between 1939 and 1944. He devised a plan to move one of the largest art collections in the world. In summer 1939, the approach of war was becoming clear. To protect them from air raids, the Louvre's artworks were boxed and transported by truck to storage sites in the countryside. The evacuation of the artworks during World War II was the most massive in the museum history. France's castle seems like the ideal place to harbor this many fugitive masterpiece. The Château de Chambord was used for more than simple storage. It became the sorting and relay point for the artworks. On August 28, 1939, the Mona Lisa was moved from Paris to safety at the Château de Chambord with 3 red points, which means it was very, very important. It was the first works we have to move. On June 17, 1945, the Mona Lisa was carefully examined after its journey back to the Louvre. Look at these 4 men struggling with one of the humanity's greatest treasure, performing a sort of ballet. This was taken in September 1939 in the Louvre in the Galerie d'Arru, and the Venus is still tied in the ropes used to move her, but she's saved and sound in the Château de Valençay. Here we see the Victoire de Samothrace being evacuated on a wooden track atop the staircase at the Galerie d'Arru. The photograph on the right shows the fragile composition to the left wing of the Victoire de Samothrace, revealing metal parts, marble fragments, and various filling materials. A metal frame connects the wing to the body and reinforces it. Today, it was the Victoire de Samothrace under restoration from September 2013 to July 2014, and you can see the difference, of course. The Louvre reopened under Nazi occupation on September 29, 1940. The Nazis were eager to showcase their cultural policy to restore the appearance of the normal life in Paris. Is it important for me to distinguish between looting, as it occurs during armed conflicts, and spoliation, meaning the disposition by violence or by fraud of a stigmatized population of its property? From October 3rd, 1940, the collaborationist Vichy government took all possible measures to exclude any Jewish influence from all sectors of the French economy. The wearing of the yellow star, symbol of the total segregation of the Jews from the rest of the French population, became mandatory on June 3rd, 1942. Here we see furniture and other items being forcibly removed from a Jewish family apartment. Over the summer of 1940, no fewer than 450 boxes of art objects were seized from large private collections. These include, for example, the internationally renowned collection of Alphonse Kahn, Paul Rosenberg, the Rothschild family, brother Jean and Jacques Seligman, the Weil-Picard family, or George Wildenstein. In these photographs, we see an inventory being taken of the works of the Wildenstein Gallery. Edward de Rothschild's collection was particularly sought after by the Nazis. Among the works in this collection was Vermeer, l'astronome, which was destined for Hitler's art museum in Liszt. On the back of the piece, we can still see a small swastika stamped in black ink. In May 1945, the famous monuments man discovered the painting in an Austrian salt mine, and l'astronome was found in a shipping crate marked H13. Of course, the astronome was recovered by the Allies in 1945 and returned to the Baron Edward de Rothschild in 1946, whose son made donation to the Louvre in 1982. In total, the Nazis spoliated over 5,000 pieces from Edward de Rothschild's collection. The empty frames served as reminders of the uncovered works. These photographs show a number of looted paintings. It's on the Louvre, in the Séquestre du Louvre, and many of which have visible markings. Here, for example, we can see an R for, here, you can see, for, of course, Rothschild. The Musée du Jeu de Paume became a sorting center for the artworks confiscated from Jewish families. This, in addition of the basement of the German embassy and 3 rooms at the Louvre, was also where the stolen art was stored. Rose Valland, allowed to work in the Jeu de Paume, secretly maintained records of countless looted artworks. Through her roles and allied efforts, these works were able to be located and recovered after the war. Hermann Göring visits the Jeu de Paume on November 3rd, 1940. Ecstatic at the idea of arranging his art collection at little cost, he returned more than 20 times, according to Rose Valland. On the right, we can see Hermann Göring and his advisor, Bruno Loseux, sitting comfortably in a couch and examining a Rembrandt monograph. I thought it was maybe important to know whether this particular work had been spoliated or not. I digitized the photograph in order to enlarge it and hopefully reassure myself by identifying it in the Louvre's collection. It turned out to be Rembrandt's 1632 portrait of Albert Cuypers. The Jewish banker of art collector Henri Pereire presented this piece to the Louvre in 1930. So it was okay. Here, this is the fiche of provenance of the Louvre in our database collection.louvre.fr, and it's open to the public, to a very large public, and for each works we made a lot of efforts to give some provenance. The art market under Nazi occupation was thriving one. Numerous sales occur between 1941 and 1944. A program of tracing the provenance of artworks acquired by the Louvre between 1933 and 1945, which is absolutely essential, was initiated in 2020. For example, this is our database at the Louvre, and for example, here a decorative piece from a Sumerian door acquired by the Louvre in 1943. Because of the date, we need to do some verification, of course. This sale of antique arts from May 10th to 11th, 1943 is very suspicious. It's a sale, you can see it here. It's a sale of Israelite goods. Israelite means Jewish goods. Maurice Bing was registered by the Nazi authorities and by the French government as being a Jewish. René Haas was a provisional administrator who took advantage at the political context to Arianize Maurice Bing's gallery. In the period immediately following the end of the war, the monuments men found 3 Rembrandts and a 16th century cave-line wood statue of Marie Madeleine at Berchtesgaden, favorite vacation spot of many Nazi dignitaries. I really enjoy the GI and the statue standing face to face in this picture. As for Marie-Madeleine, she's the only one of a few pieces from the French National Museum to be found in Germany. She lost a few fingers in her travels, but she made it back to the Louvre, where it is now my pleasure to welcome you all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Very well done. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. That was really well. The English also, I think it was very well heard. And it's also very nice for me, who's very well known with all the iconic photographs from the Netherlands from this period, to see the photographs of another country which are, or maybe are going to be also very iconic. So our next speaker is a former colleague of mine, Klaas Stutje from the NIOD, from the Expertise Center Restitution. He's a senior researcher, and he's going to take us with him how we can actually lift up the research above the object research, I suppose.
Yes.
And the title of his talk is Reconciliation Through Research, an Easy Embrace. Klaas.
Indeed. So, yeah. The microphone is working, so that's very good. Now I'm going to see if the PowerPoint is also working. There we have it. Yes, okay. So thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and also thank you for this invitation to speak here today at this wonderful event. My name is indeed Klaas Stutje. I work at the NIOD Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which is an archive and research institute in Amsterdam. And within the NIOD, I'm also working in the Expert Center for Restitution. I will talk about that later. Now, in this presentation, I want to address future agendas of research, as I was asked to do. And for this, I want to make a distinction between, you could say, 3 categories of research, or types of research, roles of research, functions of research. But before I continue, allow me to take a moment to congratulate the Mauritshuis, also the organizers of this wonderful event, and also the curators that created the exhibition Loot in 10 Stories, for the very straightforward way of addressing the topic of looted art. I've seen the exhibition, and it was my impression that the exhibition doesn't necessarily intend to educate the visitor. to present the visitor with round narratives and clear-cut answers. And actually your talk confirmed that just now. Under rather abstract titles such as The Costs, The Injustice, The Echoes, the exhibition throws difficult questions up in the air, leaving the visitor somewhat puzzled. And perhaps, or maybe not perhaps, it's true, this was just the intention. The cost in relation to a Balinese kris makes one wonder whose costs, at whose expense, who is to pay for these costs, and is it a sum quantified in rupiah or in euros, maybe in tiers, maybe in exhibition tickets, we don't know. The same goes for titles such as Echoes and Remains. I've read some reviews and framed positively, I think the makers resisted the temptation to replace old narratives with new ones right away. But this leaves us the responsibility to take up some of these questions, and in doing so, I believe we may well see the contours of future agendas of research, the theme of this panel. I had a slide prepared for a bit of the prehistory within the NIOD, but I skipped that for now. I know that we have a very strict timekeeper here. So I go to the next slide right away. When talking about research, future agendas, and the way we, at least at NIOD, work on them, I think it's good to differentiate, as I said, between into three functional categories of research. So first of all, since 2018, the NIOD houses the Expert Center for Restitution, which conducts independent and impartial research, both autonomously and on commission, into the loss of cultural goods under the Nazi regime. At the request of the Restitutions Committee, which has a very, very long title, I will not, but the Restitutions Committee, I assume you all know what I mean by that. The ACR investigates individual claims on art and cultural objects, on the basis of which the Restitutions Committee then advises the minister to return a work of art, yes or no. Now, just to give you an idea of the kind of work that we do, we produce reports, as many organizations do. We produce reports of between 50 and 100 pages in length. It takes a couple of months to complete it, and it involves multidisciplinary research into the precise circumstances of loss as a result of the Nazi persecution, of course, but also about previous ownership or later ownership. Art historical research is very important in these cases. And sometimes we need a very thorough analysis of businesses and commercial law. Previous attempts of restitution and compensation is also part of the research. I don't have the time to really go into this in depth, but I just want to say that just this month, the Restitutions Committee decided to return 3 works of art, and the one on the far left, in this case it concerns, for instance, a Byzantine ivory relief of a Virgin and Child, which is currently in the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen. Which the Restitutions Committee advised to return to the heirs of the Kunsthaus AS3. Our research, done by Maarten van der Bent, showed that this artwork was sold in 1936 by the AS3 Art Gallery in Munich, under circumstances that were, as concluded the Restitutions Committee, involuntary. During the Nazi regime, the art gallery was confronted with disproportionate tax measures that were aimed, specifically targeted at Jewish people. On one day in February 1936, Siegfried Drey was forced to submit under extreme tax measures. And he had to agree, but he died on the way home in a taxi from a heart attack. In order to be able to pay the tax debts and the penalties, the firm had then to sell the lion's share of the trading stock, including this ivory relief. And actually there's a long prehistory that also includes, for instance, Bolshevik acquisitions in Ukraine and in Italy. Anyways, these reports are confidential and not published. They are shared with claimants and current holders, who both get the possibility to comment on the outcomes. We don't advise as ACR about restitution. It's the restitutions committee that advises the minister on the matter and publishes the advice on their website. Now, this separation between research and advice may sound somewhat bureaucratic or overly cautious, maybe juridical, but it is created with the intention that decisions are made on a sound historical basis, acknowledged by all parties, but also in a way that protects researchers from unwanted pressures or manipulation. Through our work in ACR, in relation to Nazi-looted art, and through the reports that we write, we play a part in reaching a state of what you could call procedural justice. When thinking about procedural justice, and this is not a term that I invented, but that circulates in the literature, we do not focus so much on the outcomes, such as restitution or compensation, but on the process leading up to these outcomes. Much of the legitimacy of the restitution process rests on the trust and the confidence of all parties that the historical circumstances of the loss of an object are thoroughly and impartially researched, with low thresholds for descendants to start a procedure, with the opportunities of all parties to tell their story, to present available evidence, and to understand the historical circumstances made. Now, when I say all this, I don't mean to say that this procedure is perfect. It's not. It cannot be by essence. Actually, it requires permanent maintenance work and periodical revision, as we have seen, for instance, with the work of the committee, the Constam committee, that made recommendations in 2020, and earlier, and also around 2020, we have seen the recommendations by the committee led by Ms. Gonçalves Hokanyu in relation to colonial contexts. Procedural justice, in fact, can take many forms. The Dutch restitutions policy is different from procedures in other European countries and the US, also when it comes to the role of research. Equally interesting are differences in procedure between the fields of Nazi-looted art and in relation to colonial collections. In the latter case, it is actually left up to the museums to do research in case of claims. Now, at the ACR, we conform to the procedure and we play our role to the best of our abilities, of course. But at the same time, we reflect on these procedures and we note that they are changeable. We note that thorough research is generally seen as a necessary step, but also that it is sometimes seen as time and money consuming. That research is sometimes used for political ends. Someone in our group once exclaimed, "Is this about reconciliation or is this about absolution?" And I think that was a very strong remark there. We note that our research is often valued highly by descendants, even when their claim to a work of art is rejected. However, we also note that for others, research, let alone reconciliation through research, is not relevant in their personal struggle to simply get their objects back. In other words, we are happy with the role we play as researchers, but sometimes find ourselves in an uneasy embrace. Now, this was one. I had three. They are a bit shorter. Secondly, both in the context of Nazi-looted art and in the context of colonialism, we have noticed that there is a great need for a better accessibility and transparency of the sources and the research infrastructures. From discussions with colleagues, with researchers, also heritage experts from abroad, especially concerning collections acquired in a former colonial context, we learned that people actually experience great difficulties in finding out what objects are presently in the Netherlands, where to find the relevant documentation and the sources, how to work with complex, often Dutch language databases and registration systems, and sad but true, how to get the necessary visa to cross the Dutch border. This persistent demand for better accessibility and greater transparency has led to a number of initiatives. I cannot address them all. I've put some logos on the slide here. I just want to point your attention to this new collaboration between 5 institutes in the Netherlands and museums, the Colonial Collections Consortium. And there's a number of projects there. One of them is the creation of a data hub or a digital infrastructure that should allow researchers to access all the collections in the Netherlands via one website, basically. Other initiatives are digital research guides that should enable other researchers to do better research or to make it a bit more simple. And we host fellows, again with the idea that people should be able to come to the Netherlands to do research themselves. Yeah, and these initiatives have this one thing in common, that they intend to better the accessibility of objects, sources and knowledge. And we also provide a better methodological training, for instance, through this new master's at the University of Amsterdam, the MA Restitution Study. So, restitution studies. Finally, we at NIOD operate in an academic environment in which we try to reach beyond positivistic research in service of justice and in service of others. Again, a bit of an uneasy embrace there. One way, as mentioned in relation to procedural justice already, is by actively reflecting on our field and its evolution through time. We have a PhD project of Floris Kunert, who specifically looks into this. And there was a book published by Ilke Muller with Rudy Eckhart, Roof en Restitutie, de uittocht en gedeeltelijke terugkeer van Nederlands kunstbezit tijdens en na de Tweede Wereldoorlog, that also focuses on this post-war period. So this is one thing that we do. The other thing is that we are thinking about something we call social provenance research. We are very aware that the political contexts in which our type of research emerged have unintentionally perhaps steered our definition of the social groups under focus and obstructed our perspective on other groups and social categories. In the field of Nazi-looted art, for instance, we have a strong concern in the tragic fate of families with a private property paradigm going on there. The field of research into colonial collections has a traditional preoccupation with histories and objects that are claimed to represent national groups, or often in contestation, regional identities. Now, we acknowledge the political and moral importance of seriously assessing these claims by these groups, and we continue to work for them, for instance, through ACR. But we also recognize the academic risk of overlooking alternative social entities and their material culture, and argue for a social provenance history approach instead. So with alternative social entities, we may think of, and here I took the case of the Banjarmasin diamond that is currently in the Rijksmuseum from Banjarmasin, so in Indonesia, Kalimantan. So alternative social entities, we may think of political communities, here symbolized by Sultan Adam and his son Hidayatullah, who waged the war against the Netherlands in this setting around 1860. Economic groups or professions, for instance the Jewish diamond workers that later on in this history played a role in Amsterdam. Gender communities, we are now thinking of a project about Jewish women in the art world. Religious groups, local groups and sites, such as the Chinese miners in the diamond pits of Kalimantan, who actually found the diamonds, and all intersectional combinations between them. Each of these groups, or intersectional positions, had a distinct material culture and was distinctly affected by loot and dispossession. Each of these groups may have a distinct material heritage, or lack thereof in the present. A distinct trajectory of affections, of missing, remembering, forgetting, and a distinct position in arguing for restitution. Sometimes these distinct positions overlap with dominant national or familial claims for restitution, but often they also diverge from them. And why, when, where? And here I think it is relevant to return to the questions provoked by the exhibition. The costs, but whose costs? The echoes, but whose echoes? And the future, but whose future? By introducing a notion of social provenance history, we do not necessarily question or deny the importance of national identifications and their material cultures, but we recognize that national identities, and as a matter of fact also familial identities, indigenous communities, and most other entities, are subject to historical change. And instead of reinforcing the notion of identity in studying provenance of national heritage objects, we try to be aware of the role objects played in the trajectory of these identification. And it struck me that this historical trajectory is also somewhat missing in the exhibition as well, because the VR machines, they function as, the VR goggles function as time machines, where the visitor is transported back right to the moment of injustice. But what happened since? Both on the side of those who lost the object and on the side of those in Europe at the Mauritshuis who were in the position to regard the object. And this is really a history of decades and decades and decades. By adopting the term social provenance research, and these are the last words, we acknowledge the useful capacity of objects to serve as micro-historical guides through time and space, especially when it concerns often researched but ill-understood historical phenomena such as colonial looting and the functioning of the Nazi bureaucracy of dispossession. And with this, I come to the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Klaas. And as always, all this research leads to more questions. But thanks very much for your insight and also on the exhibition. Our next speaker, we're a bit out of time, but we can manage because I saw we've got a huge lunch time, so we can take a bit of that. Our next speaker is Nazima Kamardeen. Do I say that correctly?
Nazima.
Nazima. Yes. Sorry about that. Professor in the Department of Commercial Law from the University of Columbia. Colombo. Sorry. I'm Sri Lanka, obviously. And thank you very much for flying all the way out here to talk to us. And the title of your talk is The Future of Colonial Cultural Property Beyond Restitution. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. When I talk about the future and beyond, you'll have to excuse me for taking a few steps back, because there are some back steps that I think we need to discuss before we can really talk about what will happen in the future. So something has gone wrong there on that slide, but anyway, the introduction and the background is that colonial cultural property, which was lost, and I will use the word involuntary, it's not really my word, I got it from some other book, during the period of European colonization is recently in the spotlight because several former colonizers, including the Netherlands, have begun to return some of the objects of that era, and that is really the hot topic in Sri Lanka at the moment. There, it's coming. I think something's missing in that, yes. And Sri Lanka has also been promised the return of 6 of these objects. I think you're very well aware of that. And that these objects, when I wrote this, I was in Sri Lanka. That's why I said we'll arrive in Sri Lanka. But now I think they will depart to Sri Lanka if I'm here, because the restitution papers have been signed. So these are the 6 objects. I think they were also outlined in the P-Prosa report. So let me just quickly go through that. Yeah, there's a gap. So what is the focus of my speech today is that though the return of the objects marks an era in one place, and that is where the former colony pleaded to have its cultural property restored, it marks the beginning of a new era, and there are lots of unanswered questions and unexplored areas, and that's what I'm hoping to unravel now. So the first thing, I mean, we're talking about restitution, but being a lawyer, and that's why my slides are so boring, there are no pictures in it. In international law, when we say restitution, we imply that there was a wrong wrongful act imputable to a state for which reparation is due, and restitution is a part of this reparation for wrongfulness. According to my knowledge, because the Sri Lankan Restitution Committee is operating on the premise that mum's the word, no wrong has been admitted because there's no reference to the exact wrongful act or the legal regime defining this wrongfulness. And I think the word restitution is out of place, and we may be just looking at the return of objects, because return is a word legally that doesn't come with all of this baggage, with the wrongfulness, the imputability, and the duty to reparate. So there's various terminology being used in this debate. Sometimes even if you use the word restitution, people say, in relation to certain things, it should be repatriation, it should be return, it should be restitution, restitutio intent group. My idea is not to play on words, because that is, when you get to the nitty-gritty of it, there are lots of different interpretations. But my idea is just to establish that this act of return is not within the legal framework of restitution that is understood by international law and established by cases in international law. And after everything Eveline has said and Gregor has said, and the obvious discrimination that has taken place in relation to what I call brown objects, I call it in a new paper I'm working on, you might be surprised that I still have faith in law. I still have faith in international law, that I still believe in it. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because a moral return is a whimsical act. And I've seen enough of cases of cultural diplomacy which pits one developing nation, one brown nation against each other to curry favor with white nations. And I apologize for this very blatant use of terms. To curry favor with these countries, to get back their own property in return for something else. And I don't believe in it. I believe still, even in a flawed regime of law, if we can fix it, that should be the way to go, because it is just and it is not whimsical or arbitrary. So I don't really think that this word restitution is very much in place. The other question for me, and that's why I say these are back steps, on what basis were the objects requested, and on what basis are they being returned? Because as far as I know, Sri Lanka had many requests, starting with Hema Siriti Silva in the 1970s and the 1980s, and then numerous other requests. And as far as I know, Sri Lanka's basis was always the fact that the objects originated in Sri Lanka, they belong to Sri Lanka, and they should be returned to Sri Lanka. But on what basis are they being returned now? And that's important, because is this particular nation that is returning acknowledging it was wrong in 1765? Or is it wrong in 1945? Or is it wrong in 2003? We don't know. Because the policy implies, my understanding of the policy implies that it's based on a moral and not a legal duty, and that has been specifically stressed in the restitution policy. And so no legal basis can be inferred, and if no legal basis can be inferred, then there is no basis to serve as a precedent for anything that may happen in the future. And you know very well, Sri Lanka was also colonized by Britain, which has more objects, more parts of its cultural heritage in Britain than we find in the Netherlands. So one is there could be a difference of opinion as to the legality of the taking at the time, and which legal system we apply. Is it the legal system that was operative in Sri Lanka at the time of its takeover? Is it the Dutch legal system? Is it an international legal system? My belief, of course, is that colonialism is a veritable can of worms, because we are talking only now in relation to cultural heritage. But colonialism has a lot of other branches which will come with more serious consequences. For example, you start talking about slavery. How do you start compensating? Where are you going to end? And is ascertaining the legal framework taking too much time? Because right now, this entire return policy has taken place for an international legal exchange in a very short period of time. My answer to that is, we took 350 years to get here. So what would another 5 years be? And this, the other criticism, that you don't want to refer to a legal basis because you don't have experts, or you don't want experts, is aimed only solely at my country, which doesn't want, or doesn't seem to want, to have any legal experts on its restitution committee. And that's probably a problem I have with them. It's not a problem for you. So with ownership issues, My question is, should restitution imply acknowledging ownership by the country of origin only for the period before the looting occurred and after the legal transfer documents are signed, or should ownership also be reassigned to the rightful owners for the entire duration? Should any corrections or adjustments be made in hindsight regarding the acknowledgement of ownership? Because if you see colonial cultural property, that entire period is ignored by everybody, including the UNESCO Convention. It talks about, yes, you know, we are very concerned about the looting of cultural property, but it says, hold on, this little period of this colonial occupation, you do it bilaterally. And that's very unfair, because in a bilateral exchange, a country like mine will never stand up to it. Sri Lanka is struggling right now with power outages, fuel outages, there isn't enough money to pay, the balance of payments is terrible. It's not in a position to bargain with anyone on a bilateral agreement, and I think everybody in this room needs to understand that. So if the legal basis of return is not identified, we can't answer these questions. And the implications would be that if ownership in the cultural property is admitted to the home state for the entire duration of the life of the property, including the time the property was out of the country, there would have to be a conversation about compensation for wrongful possession. I don't know why nobody wants to talk about this. And this conversation is not possible under the present conditions because we are not admitting any legal regime. So the other questions are, is there a priority order for the choosing of these objects? So if there is a priority basis, I think it will help future requests, because in my opinion, and maybe because I'm not an art historian and I don't understand provenance research so well, I think that it is sometimes taking a very long time when you do extensive provenance research on objects that are not contested. If they are contested in some way between states or even between a central government and a tribe, I would understand it. But these particular objects were even catalogued by De Silva in the 1970s with the cooperation of all the museums, including the Rijksmuseum that he visited. And so I really cannot understand why it was being said in as far as 2 or 3 years ago that the provenance was still not very clear. But maybe I stand to be corrected. So giving you some insight which you may not have had before, because I have visited the museum and talked to the Director General. The museum in Colombo is working frantically to receive the objects. Originally, the Director General had an idea to house the objects in something called the Dutch Period Museum, a very beautiful building in Prince of Wales Street, which was being renovated for the purpose. But because of what I think is the haste of these objects getting back, that museum cannot be used. It's not ready in time. It still needs a little more work. So they have decided to use Colombo's museum, and the only air-conditioned room in the ground floor, because the rest of the museum is not air-conditioned, is to be the place where the objects will be housed. So for the role of returned objects in the home state, I have not yet seen a narrative that links the Netherlands and Sri Lanka in these objects. It is they were here, they are there, now they're going back. I believe that even in the time the objects or the heritage has been here, they have been looked after. It has had a life here, it has had a narrative where people have been involved with it. And I don't know who's going to dictate this narrative, because I saw a massive banner on the Colombo Museum saying, the objects will come to the motherland. So I think there might be a very patriotic take on the whole thing. And will there be any role for these stakeholders who cared for this object when it was away from Sri Lanka? So I think there may need to be a bigger role, a more collaborative role played by people in this country and people in Sri Lanka to construct a narrative that will not be all about state power. And in conclusion, so I was very well within time, the failure to identify the legal regime, I am really scared that it will return to haunt us one day, especially for Sri Lanka, especially because it's also asking for a lot of objects from Britain, from England, which we will not be able to use this as an example. Because I do not think anyone can go and say, the Dutch are really nice people, so we suggest that you do the same. And for me, this return, it seems very hasty, because I know that lots of logistical issues were not sorted out yet. And I'm more worried about really the legal issues surrounding this transfer. And I'm also concerned about the future narrative. I would like it to be a dignified narrative. I don't want it to become a narrative that goes down in traditional history books written by traditionally nationalistic people saying, we have recovered these objects, because this was a work in progress of so many people, starting with even people like PhD H.D. Silva in the 1970s, who put in considerable amount of work. It may be happening now and here in this present moment, but we have to acknowledge that it is not only the actions of the people in this present moment, but actions of so many people in the past who worked in institutions to bring this to reality, and that also has to be recorded in some way. Without which, this exercise will become glorification of nationalistic ideas, which may not be a problem for you, but I think it'll be a problem for me. So on that note, I'd love to have any discussions with you later on, and thank you very much.
Nazima, thank you so much for your interesting notes to the return of the objects to Sri Lanka. I think everyone is wide awake right now. And I would like to invite the speakers on the stage to answer the questions. And let me see, are there any questions in the room? Martina and anyone else? I mean, Martina, of course, but... Martina.
Dankjewel. Nazima, can you tell a bit more about your fear for nationalistic narratives?
Yes, well, from the banner itself that I saw, you know, it said these objects will be returned to the motherland. And the fact that there was a particular organization that was tasked with providing some publicity to this entire return process, but none of that publicity has been seen. The limited newspaper, you know, headings and the few narratives that we have seen have been accompanied by, you know, people give comments on it, and it's all about, yes, we are very happy to have this back because it has been taken away under such terrible all of that may be true, but the narrative that is being constructed is that it is completely the actions of this present government that have resulted in these objects going back. And I don't think that's a very valid comment. Of course, I don't know whether that, I mean, every government does it, right? Everybody likes to say that progress was achieved under their particular regime, and that is good for them, for their political purposes and their long-term survival and things like that. But I believe that then it just becomes an exercise in saying, we demanded the object and we got it back. And that's not true. It's not true that you just demanded the object and got it back. It's not a one-way street in any, by any stretch of the imagination. And that's not, for me, that is not useful as an exercise in how we will frame other examples, because these are just 6 objects. And according to the research that has been done, and only in public collections, there are more than 5,000 objects or parts of Sri Lanka's cultural heritage in various museums across maybe 27 or 28 countries in Europe and in other places. So that kind of narrative, that very nationalistic narrative that you see coming through, and I've seen it in history books also. You ignore some things, you only highlight the others. And even the objects that are going back, they're all symbols of royalty. There's nothing there that reflects ordinary people's lives. It's the royalty of the Kandyan kingdom. It is very much still something that will affix itself to the identity of the state and not to ordinary people. So that is my fear.
Can I ask something? Can you react on Emmanuel's story about the inability, the law inability to return objects? So you're talking about we should actually take the law as a point of departure. And in France, the problem is France does want to be a nice country, but cannot do so because of the inability. Can you sort of reflect on that?
Well, the thing is, you know, I read this very interesting book where it says that that everything is decided by lawyers, that lawyers help those in power to remain in power by drafting laws that help them to remain in power. And in a sense, that is true. If I was to just take the UNESCO Convention and look at why would it want to exclude colonial cultural property? If you wanted to draft a legal regime on something, you should be able to. And if you think it was wrong, I mean, look at the human rights regime, right? How it evolved, and I know that Eline does a lot of work in that area, right? Human rights used to be seen as a very fluid concept, like you could put anything into it, you could put anything out of it. Human rights was not really recognized, or was recognized in very flawed ways during times of slavery and so on. People said, we could have human rights, but we'll ignore half the people. So to me, and I also sit on the Law Commission in Sri Lanka, what I think is that if you really want to, you should be able to craft a law, or to amend a law, or to amend the legal system. And it's never too late to say that that particular thing was wrong. Also coming from Buddhist philosophy, which I use in some of my speakings, and when I talk about the just war, Buddha said there's nothing called a just war, because he said, I will say I'm right, you will say you were right. Nobody will go into a war saying, I am wrong. Just like nobody says, I took things illegally, involuntarily lost, you gifted it to me, I took it, it was just there. Nobody wants to say they were bad. So drafting or crafting or recrafting a legal system, we should be able to do it because values are universal. When Buddha said, let all beings be happy, right? When he talked about having this concept of the public guardianship, there were core values that resonate with all of us. Maybe Justinian and Buddhist doctrine depart on a few points, but the basic qualities are all there.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions for Klaas or Emmanuel? Here, Daphne.
Yes, thank you for your presentations. Maybe you can also reflect on this idea of reconciliation, because I remembered in the presentation of Klaas, that you mentioned the word reconciliation, and maybe I missed exactly what is meant by it or how it's understood in these processes. And also I wondered if ever, even though these processes are started, does that mean that parties are reconciled?
Sorry, that it means that parties?
It doesn't mean that parties are reconciled.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So this concept of reconciliation is, of course, a very complex concept that involves a lot of thinking and literature. And I'm not an expert on that, but what I can see is that the processes that we, for instance, at NIOT play a role in, but also all the initiatives and all the money that is now coming available, at least in the Netherlands, to undertake all kinds of projects. They are all against a certain will to get to terms with the past and to get to terms with the countries that it concerned. And there is this implicit idea that by doing all these projects, by setting up all these procedures and structures, but also by doing all this research, that we make meaningful steps, that we do not only do research to know, but we also do research to get a step further towards a thing called reconciliation. Yet at the same time, it is also difficult especially when you're caught into this process, to oversee whether you are really working towards this, whether our research helps to do this, this is difficult, and especially with relation to research, there's always people always say, and I think people have the right to say it's good, that we need to include as many voices as possible, especially knowledge, expertise, and perspectives from people, for instance, from countries of origin. And this is a fantastic thing, yet at the same time, it's a difficult process. It's not easily done. And yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? In the back.
Hi, my name's Tricia Tarrant. A comment rather than a question. Your point about symbols of royalty. That hadn't struck me before, actually. And then your point about not symbolic or representational of ordinary life. And for me, and it picks up this kind of social side of it as well, because in the Loot exhibition, for me, the most poignant and affecting of the 10 stories is that little display of all the silver items, which are symbolic of family life, and we'll never know who they belong to. So thank you for actually helping me see that contrast, which I hadn't actually been so aware of before. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question for Emmanuel here in the front.
Thank you. I was thinking about how can we speed up the process of the research that still has to be done. And I have a question for Emmanuel Polak. You have a background in researching the art market, and now you work at the Louvre. How does your former research relate to your current work at the Louvre? And does this also mean that you can maybe cluster the research in certain object groups coming from art dealers or whatever you know from your former job?
The question is about the methodology of working on provenance research.
You can use your experience from the art market research in your current work.
Yeah, we have something special in France. It's called MNR. It's object we return from Germany. We have been looted from a Jewish family, most of them. And now we have a new project. Our new project is working on the art market during World War II and looking some provenance for the works during till 1933 till 1945. And for that we have digitized 3,000 actions catalogs. And I try to explain to my colleagues how to make some provenance research, and with the curator, with scientific teams, and we have many hebdomadary meeting, and then I explain them how to work on this. And then when we have some case, very prominent, very clear case, looted case, we have to work with the French ministry, French Culture Ministry, and this the French ministry who wants to have the decision to go the work back or not. So it's a big work of documentation and tracing. But we don't have the final cut. The final cut is, for example, our government.
But you still work with individual cases?
I'm still working on the individual case, yes, for the moment.
Klaas.
So I want to tie a few things together. So one thing was indeed what you said, your fear for nationalistic discourse of taking up of this whole issue in a nationalistic way, a focus on elite objects, and I recognize this. At the same time, I think what's interesting about certain, not all maybe, but certain elite objects, is that the longer you look at it as a researcher, the more you will be able to see other histories to that object. So the canon of candy is also crafted by people, and who are these people? It's transported by people, and who are these people? And it's taken by people, and these people are also not the kings, they are soldiers. But for this, I think it's interesting to have this in-depth focus, this concentrated focus. And when I hear people saying, research is nice, but we need to speed up, how can we speed up the process, etc. Why does it take so long? I understand why people say this, especially when you're in a museum and you want to know the whole collection. Yet at the same time, it can also be very valuable to have, if only 10 objects worked out very, very well, to be able to tell all these stories and to have these discussions, more than that we have researched 10,000 objects and it's there in a database. And this is, this was just a comment that I want to make.
It's a balance. You need to balance it out, and I think it's very well. We in our last session we will actually talk about this. How can you sort of take a bigger group and put some you know, with data research, see if there's more to it, where the problems are, etc., etc. But it's very interesting, actually. Are there any more questions? There too. Could you give them just say your question, and then immediately after that, and we'll sort of remind them. You too, I hope.
Mine's for Klaus. I was just wondering if you've had any problems with the fact that the Colonial Institute's library was given to Egypt in 2013. Has that caused issues for you with researching the colonial history of this country?
We'll just remember this and then, yes, please, your question.
Thank you. My name is Daria Samalienko. I have a question. So after the Soviet Union collapse, Russia and Germany has a dialogue. It was a cultural dialogue. And within this program, many objects from Russia, from the Hermitage, were returned to Germany because these were kind of a trophy art. And because of war nowadays, this dialogue is closed. And I want to ask you, so some of these objects were in the process of returning, and nowadays it's unclear. So will these objects go back to Germany, or they will stay in archives of Hermitage? And also how to deal with a country who follow, like how to deal with a country which follows the idea of trophy art, that trophy art, it's like a replacement of some harm. Thank you.
We'll start with the first question. Klaas, that was for you.
It's a very that's a very specific question. Indeed, so this library was closed quite over a couple of years ago, and it was dismantled. The quick answer is didn't cause trouble yet, especially because not the whole library was transferred, but some parts were also brought to libraries within the Netherlands. And we mostly look into archival material that's related to museums. So, for instance, the archive of the Tropenmuseum, so the Wereldmuseum Amsterdam today. This archive is still there, so that didn't really affect us. But then still, it was a huge shame, of course, from the Dutch perspective. Yeah.
And the second question, did you? To whom was your question? Also to Klaas? Or to Nazima? Anyone who would like to take the second question?
Second question.
It doesn't work.
Just say a word, and after I give you the
this was well. Anyway,
about So to summarize it, so the relations between Russia and Germany, and after I think the end of the fall of the German wall, the return of objects, which had now stopped between Hermitage and Germany, right? And why, and what should we do about it? This demonstrates how this whole issue is very much dependent on international relations, and it's in that sense very vulnerable. We are in a window of opportunity when it comes to countries with whom the Netherlands have colonial histories, but you never know when that ends on the Dutch side or in those countries. And it just reminds me that I believe that there was a return from Russia to Sri Lanka of I think it was a kastane, maybe 15 years ago or so, or 10 years ago, which was interesting because we were in the Netherlands also thinking about what should we do with these objects, and then in Russia they were first, and this is just something that reminds me.
But Nazima, this happening, do you think law can be of help in such a situation? That Russia sort of how you say it? That relationships falter, and can law be of help?
Yeah, well, the problem is that when you have been a former colony, there's also that kind of pain. There's also that sense of injustice, that sense of mistrust that comes through. That is not the relationship we've had with Russia. So I would have placed that differently. I would place colonial cultural heritage in a completely different setting because of the relationships that led to the loss of the property. And that's why I think I'm advocating a lot for a proper legal regime for that. And I don't think those two situations are comparable, though it is written.
Yeah. Concerning our relationship with Russia, for France, for the moment, we have no contact with Russian museum, and since a very, very long time. But I want to be optimistic because since 10 years ago, I think, we had some archives back from Kandinsky. So it was really important, and it was according to the work of Patricia Kennedy Grinstead, who make a wonderful work, and she, thanks to her, we had the Russian fonds. It's called Russian fonds, and it's some archives, and some of them belongs to Jewish families. So it was a very good thing. But concerning painting, we have never had the possibility to have a contact with them, to meet them about this subject.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for the discussion, for your